My daughter Madison sent me a bill for $100,000 for her wedding venue. But inside the heavy cream-colored envelope, there was no invitation. There was just a handwritten note that said, "Daddy, you are allowed to contribute, but your presence would embarrass the Preston family." She thought I was just a checkbook. She thought she could take my money and erase me from her life because my hands are rough and my accent is not polished enough for her new in-laws. She was wrong. I didn't pay the bill. I didn't call her screaming. Instead, I made a phone call that changed the ownership of the entire wedding venue. And when the wedding day came, I walked onto the stage not as a father, but as the landlord, and I gave them exactly 15 minutes to get off my property. I am Henry Caldwell, 70 years old, and I spent 50 of those years pouring concrete and laying steel foundations so my family would never have to know the cold. If you have ever been disrespected by the very people you sacrificed everything for, hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. It comforts me to know I am not alone. The courier arrived at my gate at 10 in the morning. He was driving a silver sedan, not the usual delivery truck, which told me immediately that this package was expensive. I signed for it with a hand that still aches when it rains, a reminder of a beam that crushed 3 of my fingers back in '82. The courier looked at the scar running down my thumb and then looked away, handing me the thick, velvet-textured envelope with the words, "Preston and Caldwell Wedding," embossed in gold leaf. I walked back into my study. My house is quiet these days. Too quiet. It is a 12-room estate in the suburbs of Chicago, a place I built with my own crew, brick by brick. It was supposed to be filled with grandchildren by now. Instead, it is just me and the echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors. I sat down at my heavy oak desk, the one I bought when I landed my first skyscraper contract. I took a letter opener and slit the top of the envelope. My heart was actually beating a little faster. Even after everything, even after months of silence and cold shoulders, a father still hopes. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the olive branch. Maybe she wants me to walk her down the aisle. I pulled out the contents. There was no card. There was no RSVP slip. There was a single sheet of stiff, high-quality paper. It was an invoice. The header read, "The Gilded Cage," one of the most pretentious and expensive event spaces in the city. I scanned down to the bottom line. Total due upon receipt, $100,000. I blinked. I wiped my reading glasses and looked again. $100,000 for a rental fee. But it was what was clipped to the invoice that made my blood run cold. It was a smaller piece of stationery, Madison's personal notepaper, with her initials monogrammed in pink. I know her handwriting better than I know my own. I taught her how to hold a pencil. I sat with her for hours at the kitchen table, helping her with cursive. The note read, "Daddy, Liam and I have decided to keep the ceremony strictly for the elite circle of the Preston family. It is a matter of image. Your blue-collar friends and your limp would not fit the aesthetic we are aiming for. However, I know you want to help. I am allowing you to pay this venue deposit. Consider it your way of being there in spirit. Do not come to the venue. Security will have a list. Thanks for understanding." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the paperweight through the window. A strange, icy calm settled over me. It was the same feeling I used to get right before I fired a foreman for stealing materials. It was the clarity of absolute finality. I looked up from the paper and stared out the French windows into the sprawling backyard. The grass was covered in a thin layer of frost. Near the old oak tree, the wooden swing set I built for her on her 5th birthday was still standing. I remembered the day I built it. I had worked a double shift, my back was screaming in pain, but she had asked for a swing. So I came home, turned on the floodlights, and mixed the cement for the posts at 2 in the morning. I remembered her little voice shouting, "Push me higher, Daddy, push me higher." I pushed her higher. I pushed her all the way to private schools. I pushed her to an Ivy League university. I pushed her into a life where she never had to touch a shovel or worry about a mortgage. And this was the return on my investment. She was ashamed of me. She was ashamed of the limp I got falling off a scaffold to pay for her braces. She was ashamed of the rough hands that signed the checks for her ballet lessons. She called me blue collar, like it was a disease. I looked down at my hands. They are thick. They have calluses that no amount of lotion will ever soften. There is dirt permanently ingrained in the nail beds from years of digging. These hands built half the skyline of this city. These hands commanded respect from union leaders and bank presidents. But to my daughter, they were just dirty. I picked up the invoice again. $100,000. She didn't ask. She demanded. She assumed. She thought the old man would just sigh, wipe a tear, and write the check because he was desperate for a crumb of affection. She thought I was weak. Slowly, I stood up. My knee clicked, a sharp pain shooting up my leg, but I ignored it. I walked over to the large painting on the wall, a portrait of my late wife, Eleanor. I whispered, "I am sorry, Ellie. I tried. God knows I tried. But I cannot let her do this. I cannot let her turn into a monster." I moved the painting aside to reveal the wall safe. I spun the dial. Left to 24, right to 10, left to 52. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, there were stacks of cash, deeds to properties, and a thick leather binder. I reached past the cash. I didn't need money right now. I reached for the binder. The label on the spine read, Madison Trust Fund. I carried the binder to my desk and opened it. It was a beautiful document. I had set it up 10 years ago. It contained a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings that I had carefully curated for her. It was set to mature on her wedding day. The current value was just over $5 million. It was her safety net. It was her future. It was my way of ensuring that no matter what happened to her husband, no matter what happened to the economy, my little girl would always be safe. I looked at the beneficiary line, Madison Caldwell. I looked at the invoice again. $100,000 to stay away, $5 million to secure her life. She wanted the $100,000 so badly, she was willing to spit in my face to get it. She had no idea about the $5 million. She had never asked. She just assumed I was a simple builder with a decent savings account. She didn't know I owned the land the bank was built on. I closed the binder. The leather felt cold under my fingers. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. The logs were crackling, casting dancing shadows on the rug. The heat felt good against my skin. I stood there for a long moment, holding $5 million in my hand. I thought about the little girl on the swing. I tried to find that feeling of love, that warm, protective instinct that had driven me for 30 years. But when I looked at the fire, all I could see was the smirk on her face when she wrote, "Security will have a list." I tossed the binder into the fire. It didn't catch immediately. The heavy leather cover protected the pages for a few seconds, but then the edges began to curl. The paper turned brown, then black. A flame licked at the corner, and suddenly, the whole thing was engulfed. I watched the plastic dividers melt. I watched the ink disappear. I watched $5 million turn into ash and smoke. I didn't feel regret. I felt lighter. I walked back to my desk and picked up the phone. I didn't call Madison. I didn't call the bank to transfer the funds for the invoice. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Leo," I said when my assistant answered. He sounded surprised to hear from me on a Sunday. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell? Is everything all right?" "Everything is clear, Leo. Everything is finally clear. I need you to do something for me. I need you to look up the ownership records for a venue called the Gilded Cage." There was a pause. "You mean the wedding venue, sir? For Madison?" I looked at the invoice one last time. "No, Leo, not for Madison. For me. Find out who owns it, and find out how much debt they are in. I am going to buy a building." The line went silent for a moment, and then I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Leo knows better than to ask questions when I use that tone of voice. I sat back in my leather chair and watched the last of the trust fund turn to gray ash in the fireplace. My daughter wanted a contribution. She wanted me to pay for the venue. Well, I was going to do better than that. I was going to own it. And when I owned it, I would decide who was on the guest list and who was trespassing. The game had just begun. I sat at my desk with the phone in my hand, the screen glowing in the dim light of the study. The fire I had used to destroy her trust fund was dying down, turning into glowing red embers, much like the hope in my chest. I had already set the wheels in motion to buy the venue, but a part of me, the foolish, sentimental part of a father, needed to hear it from her lips. I needed to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that this wasn't some misunderstanding. I needed to believe that my little girl, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest while I watched the evening news, hadn't completely transformed into a stranger. So, against my better judgment, I dialed her number. The phone rang 4 times. I almost hung up. I almost convinced myself to let it go, to just pay the bill and disappear like a ghost, sparing myself the pain. But then the line clicked open. The first thing I heard was not her voice, but the sound of laughter. High-pitched, clinking glass, the thumping bass of upbeat music. It sounded like a celebration. It sounded like a world where I didn't exist. "Hello," she answered, shouting over the noise. Her voice was breathless, impatient. "Daddy, is that you? I am kind of in the middle of something. The girls and I are at the spa getting our pre-wedding glow. This is really not a good time." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask why I was calling. She just wanted me off the line. I took a deep breath, gripping the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. "Madison," I said, my voice steady but low. "I received the invoice from the Gilded Cage. I have it right here in front of me." There was a pause on the other end, and the background noise seemed to fade slightly, as if she had stepped into a hallway. Finally, she said, "Oh, good. I was worried the courier got lost. Liam's mother is freaking out about the deposit deadline. Did you wire it yet? The account number was on the bottom. Please tell me you wired it, Daddy. If we lose this date, I will literally die." She was worried about the date. She was worried about Liam's mother. "I didn't wire it, Madison," I said. The silence that followed was sharp. Her tone shifted instantly from dismissive to cold. "Why not? You have the money. I know you have the money. Don't tell me business is bad, because I saw you on the cover of Trade Builder last month. You are not going to embarrass me by being cheap, are you? It wasn't about being cheap. It was never about the money. I had spent more on her education than most people earn in a lifetime. I want to know why I am not invited, I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I want to hear you say it, Madison. I am your father. I built the roof over your head. I held your hand when your mother passed away. Why am I being banned from your wedding while you ask me to pay for it? I heard a sigh on the other end, a loud, exaggerated exhale of frustration. She sounded like she was talking to a slow child. Daddy, we have been over this. It is complicated. The Preston family, they are different. They are old society. They have standards. It is not personal. It is just politics. Politics, I repeated. Excluding your father is politics. Stop being so dramatic, she snapped, her voice rising. Look, if you really want the truth, fine. Look at yourself, Daddy. Really look at yourself. You walk with a limp. You drag that left leg around like a dead weight. Do you know how distracting that is? We are trying to have a choreographed procession. My hand instinctively went to my left knee, the knee that was crushed under a collapsing steel beam in '98 because I pushed a young apprentice out of the way. The knee that throbbed every time it rained. I got that limp paying for her private school tuition. I got that limp ensuring she never had to work a dangerous job in her life. And it is not just the leg, she continued, the cruelty pouring out of her now like water from a broken dam. It is your hands. They are rough. They are scarred. You have that permanently dirty look under your fingernails. Liam's father is a surgeon. His mother is on the board of the museum. They are refined people. And you look like the guy who fixes their toilets. I closed my eyes. The guy who fixes their toilets. That was what I was to her. Not the hero, not the provider, just a laborer. We are trying to get this wedding featured in Vogue, Daddy, she said, as if that explained everything. Vogue. They want perfection. They want elegance. A limping, rough-handed construction worker in the front row ruins the aesthetic. It ruins the fantasy. Can't you just love me enough to let me have my perfect day without making it about you? The aesthetic? She was trading her father for a magazine spread. She was trading my dignity for a few glossy photos. I sat there, listening to her breathe, listening to the faint sound of the spa music in the background. The pain in my chest was so intense, I thought I might be having a heart attack. But then, just as quickly as it came, the pain vanished. It was replaced by a cold, hard numbness. It was the feeling of a contract being terminated. It was the feeling of a demolition order being signed. She was right. I didn't fit into her world, and she certainly didn't deserve to be in mine. I understand, Madison, I said softly. Good, she said, her voice brightening, mistaking my resignation for submission. I knew you would get it eventually. So, can you wire the money within the hour? Liam is really stressing me out about this. I will take care of the venue, Madison, I said. You don't have to worry about the invoice anymore. Thank you, Daddy. You are the best. Seriously, thank you. I have to go. The masseuse is waving at me. Love you. The line went dead. Love you. The words echoed in the empty room, hollow and meaningless. She said it like a reflex, like a transaction fee she had to pay to get what she wanted. I lowered the phone from my ear and set it gently on the desk. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw the gray hair. I saw the wrinkles etched by years of sun and wind. I looked at my hands, the hands she despised. I flexed my fingers. They were strong. They were capable. They had built skyscrapers. They had built hospitals. And today, they were going to dismantle a lie. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I was done with emotions. I was a businessman now, and I had a problem to solve. I picked up the phone again and dialed a different number. This time, I didn't hesitate. Leo picked up on the first ring. "Sir." "Leo," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "I need you to come to the house. Now." "Is everything okay, Henry? You sound different." "I am fine, Leo. I have never been better. But I need you to bring your laptop. And Leo, I want you to pull every single financial record you can find on the Preston family. I want credit reports. I want bank statements. I want outstanding loans. I want to know who they owe money to and how much." There was a pause, and I could hear the smile in Leo's voice. He had been waiting for this. He hated the way they treated me. "I can have that for you in 20 minutes, sir. Is there anything else?" "Yes," I said, staring at the empty space on the wall where Madison's graduation photo used to hang. "Call the real estate attorney. Tell him to draft the purchase agreement for the gilded cage. I want to buy it cash. And I want a clause that gives me immediate executive control over all scheduled events." "Understood, sir. I am on my way." I hung up the phone and turned my chair to face the window. The snow had started to fall outside, covering the driveway in a pristine white sheet. It was beautiful. It was cold. It was unforgiving. Just like the lesson I was about to teach my daughter. She wanted a perfect wedding. She wanted a day she would never forget. I was going to make sure she got exactly that. Leo arrived at my front door exactly 19 minutes after I hung up the phone. He didn't knock. He simply keyed in the code and walked straight to my study, carrying a slim leather briefcase and the look of a man who was ready for war. Leo was 30 years old, sharp as a tack, and loyal to a fault. I hired him fresh out of college when he was just a kid with a cheap suit and a desperate need for a job. Over the last 8 years, he has become the son I never had. He looked at me, sitting there in the semi-darkness of my office, and he didn't say a word about my appearance. He didn't mention the way my shoulders were slumped, or the fact that I was staring at a blank wall. He just set his laptop down on the mahogany desk and connected it to the large 85-inch monitor mounted on the wall opposite my chair. "Sir, are you sure you want to see this?" he asked, his hand hovering over the keyboard. His voice was gentle, but there was a hardness in his eyes that told me the news was bad. I swiveled my chair around to face the screen. "I need to see everything, Leo. Don't filter it. Don't protect me. If I am going to buy a building to teach my daughter a lesson, I need to know exactly what I am paying for." Leo nodded. He typed a few commands, his fingers flying across the keys. He didn't hack into a bank or break any firewalls. He simply knew where the younger generation hid their secrets. He knew that people like Liam Preston didn't live in the real world. They lived online. They lived for the applause of strangers. "Madison told me the wedding was small," I said, mostly to myself, as the screen flickered to life. "She told me it was restricted to 50 people. She said it was a strict rule of the Preston family. Only the inner circle. Very private. Very exclusive." That was why there was no room for her father. 50 people, Leo repeated, a dry, humorless chuckle escaping his lips. He hit the enter key. Well, let's see what 50 people looks like in Liam Preston's world. The massive screen on my wall exploded with color and noise. It was a live stream. It wasn't from Liam's official Instagram account, the one he curated for his parents' society friends. This was from his Finsta, his fake Instagram account, where he posted the things he didn't want the respectable world to see. But Leo found it. Leo always finds it. The camera was shaking, held by an unsteady hand. The angle was close, too close, distorting Liam's face into a grotesque caricature of joy. He was red-faced, sweating, and clearly intoxicated. He was shouting over the thumping bass of house music. "We are live, baby!" Liam screamed into his phone, his voice echoing in my quiet study. "We are 2 days out from the event of the century, the Preston-Caldwell merger. It is going to be insane." He spun the camera around. He was in what looked like a wine cellar. Rows and rows of dusty bottles lined the walls. He grabbed one and shoved it into the lens. "Look at this, boys," he yelled. 1982 Chateau Margaux. We have 50 cases of this stuff. 50 cases! My future father-in-law is picking up the tab for the venue, so we decided to blow the budget on the booze." My jaw tightened. He called me his future father-in-law. He acknowledged my existence only as a wallet. Then he started walking. He walked out of the cellar and into a large room filled with people. It looked like a bachelor party or a pre-wedding mixer. He grabbed a guy by the shoulder. "Tell them, Brad. Tell them how big this is going to be." The guy, Brad, laughed and raised a beer bottle. 500 guests, bro. 500. We are shutting down the whole block. It is going to be a riot. 500. The number hit me like a physical blow. 500 people. Madison had looked me in the eye, or at least she had said it over the phone with that conviction she was so good at, and told me 50. She lied to me by a factor of 10. She didn't just trim the guest list to exclude me. She invited the entire city of Chicago and specifically carved me out. Liam was still talking on the screen. "Yeah, we got the mayor coming. We got the whole rugby team. It is going to be legendary. And the best part? No buzzkills allowed. No old people ruining the vibe. Just us, the elite, the young, the beautiful." Leo paused the video. Liam's face froze on the screen, his mouth open in a lopsided grin, his eyes glazed over with entitlement. I stared at him. This was the man my daughter was marrying, a man who bragged about spending my money while mocking my generation, a man who lied as easily as he breathed. But Leo wasn't done. "That is just the groom, sir," Leo said quietly. He minimized the video window and opened a spreadsheet. "This is the guest list." I managed to access the back end of the wedding planner's RSVP system. It wasn't hard. Her password was literally wedding123. He scrolled down the list. It was endless. Names upon names. 512 confirmed guests. I stood up and walked closer to the screen. I needed to see the names. I needed to see who was worthy of witnessing my daughter's vows when I was not. I saw the names of her college friends. I saw the names of Liam's fraternity brothers. That was expected. But then, as Leo scrolled down to the section marked VIP, Business Associates, my blood ran cold. "Stop," I said. "Scroll back up." Leo stopped. There, in black and white, was the name Arthur Penhaligon. I felt a wave of nausea. Arthur Penhaligon. The man who had tried to sue my construction company into bankruptcy in '95. The man who had spread rumors that I used substandard steel. I had spent 2 years in court fighting him to save my reputation. He was my sworn enemy. He was a man who had publicly called me a crook, and he was invited. He was going to be there, eating the food I paid for, drinking the wine I paid for, laughing with my daughter. "Scroll down," I commanded, my voice shaking. Leo scrolled. Sarah Jenkins, the woman who had insulted my late wife at the charity gala, making fun of Eleanor's dress because it wasn't designer. Madison knew that story. Madison had cried with me when Eleanor came home that night, humiliated. And now Sarah Jenkins was on the list. Robert Thorne, the banker who denied my first loan application and told me to go back to laying bricks. Invited. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a gathering of everyone who had ever looked down on me. It was a hall of fame of people who had tried to break me. And my daughter, my own flesh and blood, had opened the door for them while slamming it in my face. She didn't just exclude me because of my limp. She excluded me because she wanted to replace me. She wanted the status these people had. She wanted their approval so badly that she was willing to sell her father's dignity to get it. I turned away from the screen. I couldn't look at it anymore. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it went beyond anger. It settled into a cold, hard resolve in the pit of my stomach. "She invited Arthur," I whispered. "She invited the man who tried to destroy our family business." Leo didn't say anything. He knew there were no words for this. I walked back to my desk and sat down. I looked at the phone. I looked at the checkbook. I looked at the picture of Madison on my desk, the one taken when she was 12, smiling with braces, holding a trophy I had helped her win. That girl was dead. The woman who replaced her was a stranger. A stranger who was throwing a party for my enemies on my dime. "Leo," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Close the laptop." He snapped it shut. "Get the car," I said. "Where are we going, sir?" Leo asked, standing up. "We are going to the Gilded Cage," I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. I saw enough. "I don't just want to buy the building, Leo. I want to own the ground they walk on. I want to own the air they breathe. And I want to make sure that when Arthur Penhaligon shows up on Saturday, he has to ask me for permission to enter." I walked out of the study without looking back. The sadness was gone. The father was gone. All that was left was the builder. And I was about to tear it all down. As the black town car glided through the snow-dusted streets of Chicago, the interior was silent except for the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic tapping of Leo's fingers on his keyboard. I sat in the back seat, watching the city pass by. I built 3 of the skyscrapers visible through the tinted window. I poured the foundation for that hotel on the corner. I knew the bones of this city, and now I was about to examine the bones of the family that had stolen my daughter. "Here it is, sir," Leo said, his voice cutting through my thoughts. He turned the laptop screen toward me. "You are not going to believe this." I put on my reading glasses and looked at the glowing spreadsheet. I expected to see wealth. I expected to see old money, family trusts, maybe some diversified portfolios in oil or shipping. That was the story the Prestons told everyone. That was the story Madison had sold me. Richard and Cynthia Preston, the pillars of society, the patrons of the arts. Instead, I saw red. The screen was a sea of negative numbers. It was a financial crime scene. "They are broke, Henry," Leo said, dropping the formality for a moment because the shock was too great. "They aren't just cash poor, they are insolvent." I scrolled down the list of liabilities. It was worse than bankruptcy. It was a catastrophe. 6 months ago, the Prestons had liquidated their primary assets. They sold their summer home in the Hamptons quietly through an LLC to avoid press. They cashed out their retirement accounts. And they dumped every single cent into a speculative cryptocurrency exchange that I remembered reading about in the Wall Street Journal. The one that imploded and vanished overnight. "They lost everything," I whispered, tracing the line that showed a loss of $12 million in 48 hours. "Everything," Leo confirmed. "And look at the dates on these bank notices. They are 3 months behind on the mortgage for their penthouse. They have maxed out 6 different credit lines. They are currently floating checks between accounts just to keep the lights on." I sat back, the leather seat creaking under my weight. The people who looked down on me for having dirt under my fingernails were drowning. They were destitute. But that didn't explain the wedding. If they were broke, why throw a 500-person gala at the most expensive venue in the city? Why order vintage wine? Why hire a symphony orchestra? Then Leo opened a folder marked Email Correspondence. "This is the smoking gun, sir," Leo said. "Read the email from Richard Preston to his lawyer." I leaned in. The email was dated 2 weeks ago. It read, "We need the wedding to happen, Bob. We have the Japanese investors coming. If they see the scale of the event, if they see the mayor there, they will sign the seed funding for the new venture. We need that capital to pay off the bridge loan. If the wedding is canceled, the house of cards falls. We go to jail, Bob. We need cash for the venue deposit, or the whole thing is over." I felt a cold chill go down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. "It is a Ponzi scheme," I said, my voice hard. "The wedding isn't a celebration of love. It is a sales pitch. They are using my daughter's wedding as a backdrop to scam a new group of investors. They are putting on a show of wealth to trick people into giving them money to cover their old debts. And that is where you come in," Leo said quietly. I nodded slowly. The $100,000. Madison said it was a contribution. She said it was because I wasn't good enough to attend. But that was a lie. They didn't ban me because of my limp. They didn't ban me because I was blue-collar. They banned me because they knew I would see through them. If I walked into that room, I would spot the desperation in Richard's eyes. I would recognize the smell of fear that comes off a man who is about to lose everything. And more importantly, they needed my money to keep the lights on. My $100,000 wasn't a gift. It was a bailout. It was the only thing standing between them and eviction from the gilded cage. "They are using my money to rent the stage for their fraud," I said, the anger simmering down into a focused, dangerous heat. "And they are using Madison as the prop." "Does she know?" I asked. Leo hesitated. "I checked her texts, sir. She knows they are having cash flow issues. She mentioned it to a friend. But she thinks it is temporary. She thinks it is just a liquidity problem. She has no idea they are bankrupt. She thinks she is marrying into a dynasty, but she is marrying into a disaster." I looked out the window again. We were getting closer to the venue. I could see the iron gates of the gilded cage approaching. My daughter was a fool. She was vain, she was selfish, and she was cruel. But she was being played. These people, these aristocrats, were feeding her to the wolves to save their own skins. They had manipulated her into excluding her own father so they could steal his money without him asking questions. They thought they were so smart. They thought the old construction worker would just write the check and cry in his empty house. They underestimated what it takes to survive in my world. They built their fortune on speculation and gambling. I built mine on steel and concrete. I knew how to weather a storm. They were about to drown in a puddle. "Leo," I said, turning back to him. "Did the transfer go through for the purchase of the building?" "Yes, sir," Leo replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "The wire cleared 10 minutes ago." "You are officially the owner of the Gilded Cage. The deed is being couriered to us as we speak." "Good," I said. I looked at the tablet one last time, at the faces of Richard and Cynthia Preston on their website, smiling their bleached white smiles. They looked so confident. They looked so untouchable. "They want to play make-believe," I muttered. "They want to act like royalty using my checkbook. They want to turn a sacred vow into a business transaction." I clenched my fist. The knuckles were white, the veins prominent. These were the hands that had built half this city, and now they held the fate of the Preston family in a vice grip. "They want a show," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "Fine. I will give them a show." But they forgot one thing about theater, Leo. The producer calls the shots. The owner of the theater decides when the curtain falls. I looked at Leo, and for the first time in days, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just cornered its prey. "They want to use my money to act like aristocrats. Fine. I will let them set the stage. I will let them invite the investors. I will let them pour the champagne. And then, when the lights are brightest, when everyone is watching, I will walk out there and I will turn off the power. I will direct this play now," I said. The car slowed down as we approached the massive iron gates of the venue. The security guard stepped out of his booth, looking skeptical at our vehicle. He didn't know that the man in the back seat had just bought the ground he was standing on. Leo closed the laptop. "What is the plan, sir?" I adjusted my cufflinks. "The plan is simple, Leo. We are going to let them think they won. We are going to let them think the money is coming. We are going to let them build their house of cards as high as they possibly can. Because the higher it is, the louder the crash will be when I kick the foundation out from under it. Drive through, Leo. I want to inspect my new property." I steered my 1978 Ford F-150 down the long, winding driveway that led to the Grand Manor. The engine rumbled with a deep, throaty cough that sounded like thunder in the quiet, upscale neighborhood. This truck was older than Madison. It had rust around the wheel wells, and the heater only worked when it felt like it. But it had never failed me. It was honest. It was exactly what it appeared to be. Unlike the building looming in front of me. The Grand Manor was trying too hard. That was my professional opinion as a builder. It was a massive structure designed to look like a French chateau, but I could spot the shortcuts from 50 yards away. The stone facade was veneer, not solid rock. The columns were decorative, not load-bearing. It was a perfect metaphor for the life my daughter was trying to buy into. A beautiful shell with nothing holding it up inside. I pulled up to the main gate, the brakes squealing slightly as I came to a stop. A security guard in a uniform that looked more expensive than my entire wardrobe stepped out of the booth. He was young, with a jawline that suggested he spent more time in the gym than reading books, and he looked at my truck with open disdain. He didn't even wave. He just held up a hand, palm out, stopping me like I was a stray dog trying to enter a restaurant. "Deliveries are around the back, Pops," he said, pointing a thumb over his shoulder without making eye contact. "The service entrance is off the north road. You can't bring that heap through the main archway. You are dripping oil on the cobblestones." I rolled down the window, letting the cold air rush into the cab. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I just looked at him with the same look I used to give apprentices who showed up late. "I am not a delivery driver, son," I said. "I have a meeting with George Sterling. Open the gate." The guard laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Mr. Sterling is in crisis meetings all morning. He isn't meeting with—" He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my faded Carhartt jacket and the work boots I had been wearing since 6 this morning. "He isn't meeting with plumbers today. If a pipe burst, go talk to the groundskeeper. Now turn this thing around before it dies right here and blocks the entrance." I turned off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. I opened the door and stepped out. I am 6'2". My back hurts and my leg drags, but when I stand up straight, I still cast a long shadow. I walked up to the guard until I was inches from his face. "I am not the plumber," I said, my voice low and steady like a grinding stone. "And if you don't open that gate in the next 10 seconds, the next person you will be reporting to is the unemployment office. Call George. Tell him Henry Caldwell is here. Tell him I brought the solution to his cash flow problem." The guard hesitated. He saw something in my eyes that made him nervous. It wasn't money. It was authority. He mumbled something into his radio, his eyes never leaving my face. A moment later, the radio crackled back. A frantic voice shouted, "Send him up! Send him up immediately!" The guard blinked, confused, but he hit the button. The massive iron gates swung open with a groan. I didn't thank him. I just climbed back into my truck, started the engine and drove through, leaving a cloud of exhaust in his face. I parked right in front of the main entrance, between a Porsche and a Mercedes. I grabbed the heavy leather briefcase from the passenger seat and walked up the marble steps. The doors opened automatically, and I stepped into a lobby that smelled of lilies and floor wax. It was impressive, I had to admit. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light like a mirror. But as I walked, my boots squeaking slightly on the pristine surface, I saw the cracks. I saw a water stain on the silk wallpaper near the ceiling. I saw that the gold trim on the reception desk was peeling slightly at the corner. This place was bleeding money. It was beautiful, but it was dying. "Mr. Caldwell!" I turned to see a man rushing down the grand staircase. It was George Sterling. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His tie was crooked, his hair was thinning, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He was holding a stack of papers in one hand and a phone in the other. "Thank God," George said, breathless as he reached me. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He just looked at the briefcase. "Is that it? Is that the check? Please tell me you brought the cashier's check. The bank is calling me every hour. If I don't make the bond payment by 5 o'clock, they are going to foreclose." He thought I was the savior. He thought I was the obedient father coming to clean up the mess. I looked around the lobby. "So this is what $100,000 rents you," I said, ignoring his question. "It is flashy, George. But you have got dry rot in the east wing. I can smell it." George blinked, impatient. "Mr. Caldwell, please, I don't have time for a building inspection. Your daughter, the Prestons, they kept promising the wire transfer was coming. They said it was an international delay. They said the funds were frozen. I have held this date for months based on their word." He grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. "If you don't pay the deposit right now, I have to cancel the wedding. I have to. I have another client willing to take the date, but I need the cash today." He was shaking. This man was the owner of the most exclusive venue in the city, and he was terrified. It was pathetic. It was exactly the kind of weakness the Prestons preyed on. I pulled my arm away gently. "Let's go to your office, George. We have business to discuss." "We don't need an office," he pleaded. "Just give me the check. The Prestons said you were handling the invoice. I stared at him until he stopped talking. I am handling it, I said, but not out here in the lobby. Office. Now. George swallowed hard. He nodded and led me down a hallway lined with portraits of aristocrats who probably never existed. We entered his office. It was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere. An ashtray was overflowing. This was the control room of a sinking ship. I walked over to the large oak table in the center of the room and set the briefcase down. The thud it made was heavy, solid. George stood on the other side of the table, his eyes glued to the leather case. So, he said, wiping his forehead, the full 100,000 is in there. I looked at him. I looked at the man who was about to lose everything because he trusted the wrong people. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. No, George, I said. There is no $100,000 in there. George's face went pale. What? What are you talking about? You said... I didn't say I was here to pay the rent, I interrupted. I looked around the room, taking my time. I walked over to the window and looked out at the grounds. I saw the white tent being set up for the reception. I saw the florists unloading thousands of white roses. My daughter wants to be a queen for a day, I said, my back to him. She wants to stand in this castle and look down on the world. She thinks this place defines her worth. I turned back to face him. I am not going to rent this castle for her, George. That is a waste of money. Why rent when you can own? I unlatched the briefcase. The snaps clicked loudly in the silent room. I opened the lid. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. There was a single thick document, a purchase agreement, and a bank draft for $15 million. George looked at the document, then at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I am not here to pay the deposit, I said, my voice hard and final. I am here to buy the building. The Prestons are broke, George. They aren't going to pay you. They never were. You are waiting for a check that doesn't exist. George slumped into his chair. Broke. But they drove a Bentley. Leased, I said. Just like this building is about to be foreclosed. You have two choices right now. You can kick me out, wait for the bank to take your keys at 5 o'clock, and walk away with nothing but debt. Or you can sign that paper. You pay off your loans, you walk away with a clean slate and a few million in your pocket for retirement. George looked at the check. He looked at the zeros. I saw the fight leave his body. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a survivor grabbing a life raft. But the wedding, he stammered. If you buy it, what happens to the wedding? I smiled. It was a cold smile. Don't worry about the wedding, George. As the new owner, I will oversee the event personally. I have some very specific ideas about how the reception should go. I pushed the contract across the table towards him. I took a gold pen from my pocket and laid it next to the paper. Sign it, I said, and then give me the master keys. I have some renovations to plan. George picked up the pen. His hand was trembling so much that the gold barrel clicked against the mahogany table. He looked at the bank draft again, his eyes widening as he counted the zeros. $15 million. It was more money than he had seen in 10 years of running this venue. It was his salvation. It was his exit strategy. But before the nib touched the paper, he hesitated. He looked up at me, his brow furrowed with the nervous energy of a man who knows something is too good to be true. But the closing, Mr. Caldwell, he stammered. A commercial transfer like this takes weeks. Title searches, inspections, insurance transfers. We can't just sign a piece of paper and hand over the keys. The city will need filings. The lawyers will need to review the encumbrances. I didn't blink. I didn't shift in my chair. I simply reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out another envelope. I have already done the title search, George, I said, sliding the papers across the desk. My team ran it this morning while I was driving over here. I know about the second mortgage you took out in 2019. I know about the lien from the catering company. I know about the zoning dispute with the neighbor. George flinched as if I had slapped him. The $15 million covers all of it, I continued, my voice calm and relentless. It pays off the bank. It satisfies the liens. And it leaves you with a very healthy profit. As for the closing, that is why I am paying you a 20% premium over the market value. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I am buying time, George. I am buying speed. My attorney is sitting in the lobby right now with a notary public. We are going to sign the deed today. We are going to file the electronic transfer immediately. By the time the sun goes down, this building belongs to me. Or I can walk out that door, and you can explain to the bank why you turned down a cash offer on the day of your foreclosure. George swallowed hard. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was barely noon. He looked back at the check. The fight went out of him completely. He was a drowning man, and I had just thrown him a life preserver made of solid gold. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. Let's do it." He signed. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a guillotine blade falling, severing his connection to this place, and severing the Preston's safety net. But I wasn't done. "Before you countersign the transfer," I said, placing my hand over the document, "there is one more thing. It is an addendum to the existing rental contract with the Preston family." George looked confused. "The rental contract? But you own the place now. Why do you care about the rental terms?" "Because," I said, pulling out a single sheet of legal paper, "this is the trap, George. This is how we catch the rats." I pushed the addendum towards him. "Read Clause 14, Section B," I commanded. George squinted at the paper. It was drafted by my top corporate litigator, a man who charged $1,000 an hour to destroy people's lives legally. "It says," George read aloud, his voice shaking, "in the event of a change of ownership, the new owner reserves the right to demand immediate settlement of all outstanding balances. Failure to remit full payment by 12 p.m. on the day of the event constitutes a material breach of contract. In such an event, the owner reserves the right to terminate services immediately, revoke access to the property, and remove all unauthorized persons from the premises without notice." He looked up at me. This gives you the right to kick them out in the middle of the wedding if they don't pay." "Exactly," I said. "But they think you are paying," George said. "They think the money is coming from you." "And it isn't," I replied. "So when noon on Saturday rolls around and that account balance is still zero, they are in breach. They are trespassing. And I will have the legal authority to evict them." George looked terrified. "Mr. Caldwell, this is brutal. You are going to humiliate them in front of 500 people." "They humiliated me first, George," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "They took my daughter. They took my money. They took my pride. I am just taking my building back." I tapped the paper. "Sign the addendum, George. It is a condition of the sale. No signature, no $15 million." He didn't hesitate this time. He signed the addendum. He signed the deed. He signed the transfer of operations. Within 20 minutes, the notary had stamped the documents, and the transaction was recorded. I stood up. I felt 10 years younger. The pain in my knee was gone. The weight on my chest was gone. I wasn't just a retired construction worker anymore. I was the landlord. "Now listen to me carefully, George," I said, buttoning my jacket. "This is the most important part. No one can know." George nodded, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Of course." "I mean it," I said, stepping closer to him. "If the Prestons find out I own this building before Saturday, the deal is void. I will sue you for breach of confidentiality. You are still the face of the Grand Manor. You will answer their calls. You will smile. You will tell them everything is on track. When they ask about the deposit, you tell them there is a grace period until Saturday noon. You lull them into a false sense of security." "I will," George promised. "I won't say a word." "Good," I said. I picked up the briefcase, which was now empty of the contract, but heavy with the promise of justice. I walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. "By the way, George, do you have a master key for the lighting and sound system booth?" "Yes," he said, reaching into his drawer and pulling out a heavy brass key ring. "It controls everything. The chandeliers, the microphones, the stage power." I took the keys. They felt cold and heavy in my hand. "Perfect," I said. I walked out of the office and back into the lobby. The florists were still bringing in the white roses. The caterers were setting up the tables with gold-rimmed plates. It looked like a fairy tale. It looked like a dream. I walked past a young woman arranging place cards. I glanced at one. It read, "Reserved for the groom's family." I smiled. Enjoy it while it lasts, I thought. I walked out into the cold winter air. My truck was waiting where I left it. The security guard was gone, probably on a break or avoiding me. I climbed into the cab and tossed the keys onto the dashboard. I drove away from the Grand Manor, not looking back. I had the deed in my pocket. I had the law on my side. And I had 48 hours to prepare for the greatest performance of my life. My daughter wanted a memorable wedding. She wanted drama. She wanted a day that people would talk about for years. I was going to give her exactly what she asked for. The shears made a clean, sharp sound as I cut the dead branch from the ancient bonsai tree on my desk. Snip. The dry wood fell onto the mahogany surface, lifeless and brittle. I have had this tree for 30 years. It requires patience. It requires discipline. And most importantly, it requires the willingness to cut away the parts that are rotting, no matter how much you might want to save them. If you let the rot stay, it spreads. It kills the whole tree. I was finally learning that the same rule applied to family. My phone, sitting on the corner of the desk, had been vibrating non-stop for the last 20 minutes. It danced across the polished wood, buzzing like an angry hornet. I didn't look at it. I knew who it was. I knew exactly what the messages said without even unlocking the screen. It was 48 hours before the wedding. The timeline I had orchestrated was tightening like a noose around the Prestons' necks. Finally, I set the shears down and picked up the device. The screen was lit up with a stream of notifications from Madison. "Daddy, pick up the phone. George just called Liam. He said they haven't received the wire yet." "Are you trying to humiliate me? They are going to release the date to another couple if the funds aren't there by noon today." "Daddy, please. I will never ask you for anything again. Just pay it." I read them with a detachment that surprised even me. A week ago, these messages would have sent me into a panic. I would have been scrambling to call the bank, apologizing for the delay, desperate to soothe her anxiety. But today, I just saw them for what they were. Tantrums. Manipulation. She wasn't afraid of losing a father's love. She was afraid of losing a venue. She didn't care about my presence. She cared about my solvent. I walked over to the window. The winter sun was weak, casting long, pale shadows across the snow. I thought about the text she had sent earlier, the one about me embarrassing her. I thought about the guest list with my enemies on it. I typed a reply. I didn't type, "I paid the bill." I didn't type, "I love you." I chose my words with the precision of a contract lawyer. I wrote, "The venue issue has been handled. You don't need to worry about the deposit anymore. Focus on being a beautiful bride." It wasn't a lie. The venue issue was handled. The deposit was irrelevant because I owned the building. But I knew how she would interpret it. People hear what they want to hear, especially when they are desperate. I hit send. Almost immediately, the buzzing stopped. The frantic stream of texts ceased. I went back to my bonsai tree. I picked up the shears again. There was another branch, twisted and yellowing, near the base. It needed to go. A few minutes later, the door to my study opened. Leo walked in. He wasn't carrying his laptop this time. He was holding his phone, and he had a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "She took the bait, sir," Leo said, closing the door behind him. I didn't look up from the tree. "Tell me." Leo tapped his screen. "I still have access to their cloud backups." She just sent a voice memo to Liam. "Do you want to hear it?" "Play it," I said, slicing through the thickest part of the dead branch. Leo pressed play. Madison's voice filled the room. It wasn't the hysterical, pleading voice she had used in her texts to me. It was smug. It was triumphant. It was the voice of someone who thinks they have outsmarted the world. "Babe, relax," she said, her voice dripping with relief and arrogance. I told you the old man would cave. He just texted me. He paid it. I knew he would. He is so desperate for me to like him, he would pay double if I asked. God, he made me sweat for it, though. So dramatic. But we are good. The venue is secured. You can tell your dad to stop freaking out. We are in the clear. I listened to her laugh at the end of the recording. It was a cold, dismissive laugh. Leo cut the audio. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy. She called me the old man. She said I was desperate. She mocked the very generosity she had begged for. I carefully placed the dead branch in the waste bin. She thinks she won, Leo said quietly. That is the point, Leo, I replied, wiping the sap from the blades of my shears. If she thought she lost, she would cancel the wedding. She would run away. We need her to feel safe. We need them all to feel safe. We need them to walk into that trap with their heads held high, thinking they are the kings and queens of Chicago. I turned to face him. Did George play his part? Yes, sir, Leo nodded. I spoke to him 10 minutes ago. He called the Prestons right after you sent the text. He told them that a resolution had been reached regarding the venue and that the event is green-lit to proceed. He didn't say who paid. He didn't say the debt was cleared. He just said they could proceed. They were so happy they didn't ask for a receipt. Of course they didn't, I said. When you are drowning, you don't ask where the air is coming from. You just breathe. I walked over to the fireplace and warmed my hands. The game was set. The players were in position. Madison and Liam were celebrating their victory, drinking champagne, probably laughing about how they had manipulated the clueless old man. They had 48 hours of happiness left. I would give them that. "Is everything ready for Saturday?" I asked. Leo nodded. "The security team is briefed. They know to take orders only from you. The sound technician has been replaced with our guy, and the legal team will be waiting in the green room behind the stage." "And the invoice?" I asked. Leo smiled. "The itemized bill for your parenting expenses? It is printed and ready. $2,400,000, including interest." Good. I looked at the bonsai tree one last time. It looked smaller now. It looked barer. But the shape was cleaner. The lines were true. It would survive the winter because I had the courage to cut it back. "I am going to take a nap, Leo," I said, unbuttoning my cuffs. "Wake me up if the building burns down. Otherwise, I will see you on Saturday." Leo nodded and left the room. I sat down in my leather armchair and closed my eyes. I wasn't tired. I just wanted to savor the quiet. I wanted to enjoy these last few hours of peace before I brought the storm. Madison thought I was weak. She thought I was a checkbook with a heartbeat. On Saturday, she was going to learn that the hand that writes the checks is also the hand that holds the gavel. And the verdict was already in. Saturday arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted, a perfect backdrop for the most expensive lie in Chicago history. From my vantage point in the darkened security control room, tucked away behind the mezzanine level of the Grand Manor, I watched the monitors. The high-definition cameras gave me a better view than any guest had. I could see the sweat on the waiters' brows as they carried trays of caviar. I could see the sparkle of diamonds on wrists that I knew were buried in debt. And I could see my daughter, Madison, spinning in the center of the ballroom like a princess in a music box, completely unaware that the music was about to stop. The ballroom was disgusting in its opulence. It wasn't just beautiful, it was excessive. There were ice sculptures in the shape of swans dripping slowly onto beds of imported oysters. There were thousands of white roses, so many that the scent must have been suffocating. The tables were set with gold-rimmed china and crystal goblets that cost more than my first car. It was a scene designed to scream old money, to shout to the world that the Preston family was untouchable. I zoomed in on camera 4. Richard and Cynthia Preston were holding court near the Champagne Tower. Richard was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too tightly around the waist, a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other, even though this was a non-smoking venue. He was talking to a group of men in sharp suits, the Japanese investors Leo had told me about. I could see Richard's animated gestures, his fake, booming laugh. He was selling them. He was pointing at the chandeliers, pointing at the crowd, using my money to prove his solvency. I saw him snap his fingers at a passing waiter. The young man stopped, balancing a heavy tray. Richard didn't even look him in the eye. He just pointed at his empty glass and made a circling motion, demanding a refill without wasting a word on the help. It made my blood boil. That waiter was probably working 2 jobs to pay for college, just like I did. To Richard, he was furniture. Then I shifted my gaze to Madison. She looked beautiful. I won't deny that. She was wearing a custom designer gown that hugged her figure, with a train that trailed 6 feet behind her. But her face was hard. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was moving from group to group, accepting compliments, playing the role of the blushing bride. I turned up the volume on the directional microphone feed. I wanted to hear what she was saying. She was standing with her sorority sisters, girls who had never worked a day in their lives. "Where is your dad, Maddie?" one of them asked, looking around. "I haven't seen him. I thought he would be walking you down the aisle." Madison didn't flinch. She took a sip of her champagne and tossed her hair back. "Oh, you know Daddy. He is absolutely heartbroken he couldn't be here. He is stuck in Dubai." "Dubai?" the friend asked, impressed. "Yes," Madison lied smoothly. "He is closing a massive deal for the new Skyline project. The sheikh specifically requested him. He tried to fly back, but the private jet had a mechanical issue in London. He is devastated. But business is business. He sent a huge check, of course." I sat in the dark control room and shook my head. Dubai. She had invented an entire international business trip to explain why she was ashamed of me. She couldn't just say, "My father is a builder and I didn't want him here." No, she had to turn me into a globe-trotting tycoon to fit her narrative. She was using a fictional version of me to impress her friends, while the real me was sitting upstairs holding the deed to the building. The deception was total. Everyone in that room believed the lie. They believed the Prestons were rich. They believed Madison was an heiress to an international empire. They believed the champagne would never stop flowing. I checked my watch. It was 11:55. 5 minutes until the deadline. 5 minutes until the grace period I had instructed George to give them expired. I picked up the radio. "Send him in," I said to the floor manager I had hired just yesterday. On the monitor, I saw my man, Mr. Evans, straighten his tie. He was a tall, imposing man with a face like granite. He walked through the crowd, ignoring the festivities, and made a beeline for Liam. Liam was standing near the DJ booth, laughing with his groomsmen, his face flushed with alcohol. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's suit. Mr. Evans tapped him on the shoulder. Liam turned around, annoyed at the interruption. I turned up the audio feed again. "Sir," Mr. Evans said, his voice cutting through the noise, "I need to speak with you regarding the final settlement of the venue invoice." Liam rolled his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes. "Not now, man. Can't you see I am in the middle of a celebration? Go talk to the planner." "The planner has not received the funds, sir," Mr. Evans said, unmoving. "The deadline is noon. That is in 3 minutes. We need the remaining balance of $100,000, or we will be forced to cease operations." Liam laughed. It was a loud, ugly sound. He looked at his friends for support. "Cease operations? Do you know who I am? Do you know who my family is? My father-in-law is Henry Caldwell. He wired the money days ago. If your system is too slow to find it, that is your problem, not mine." "We have checked all accounts, sir," Mr. Evans persisted. "There is no record of payment." Liam stepped closer to Evans, trying to intimidate him. "Look, pal, my father-in-law covers everything. He is probably buying your company right now just to fire you. So get out of my face before I have you thrown out. Don't ruin my vibe with your incompetence." Mr. Evans didn't blink. He just looked at his watch. "Very well, sir," Evans said. He turned and walked away. Liam turned back to his friends, shaking his head. "Can you believe the help these days?" he shouted. "No respect." I watched Liam raise his glass for a toast. He tapped a spoon against the crystal, calling for silence. The room quieted down. 500 faces turned towards him. He grinned, basking in the attention. "I would like to propose a toast," Liam began, his voice booming over the speakers. "To the Preston family, and to my beautiful bride, Madison. We are just getting started." I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. "It is noon, gentlemen," I said into the headset. "Kill it." My finger pressed the master button on the console. Instantly, the ballroom plunged into darkness. The crystal chandeliers went black. The stage lights died. The music cut off with a sharp electronic screech that echoed in the sudden silence. For a second, there was total confusion. Then, the murmurs started. People were pulling out their phones, using the flashlights to see. I could hear Cynthia Preston's shrill voice screaming, "What is happening? Who turned off the lights?" I saw Liam standing in the dark, frozen, his glass still raised. He looked around wildly. "Someone fix this!" he yelled. I waited. I let them sit in the dark for a full 30 seconds. I let the fear set in. I let the embarrassment take root. Then, I hit the button for the main entrance doors. The hydraulic motors groaned, a deep, mechanical sound that vibrated through the floor. The massive double doors at the far end of the ballroom began to open slowly. The bright, harsh light from the midday sun poured into the dark room, blinding them, silhouetting the figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't a technician. It wasn't a waiter. It was me. I stood there, framed by the light, my shadow stretching long across the dance floor, reaching all the way to where my daughter stood, trembling. I adjusted my cuffs, took a deep breath, and stepped into the room. The silence was absolute. The play was over. The director had arrived. The silence in the ballroom was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath, the kind that comes right before an explosion. I stepped across the threshold, my Italian leather shoes making a sharp, authoritative click on the marble floor. I was not wearing my work boots. I was not wearing my faded denim jacket or the flannel shirts that my daughter despised. I was wearing a bespoke Brioni suit, charcoal gray, tailored to perfection to hide the stoop in my shoulder and accentuate the breadth of my chest. In my right hand, I held a cane. It was not a medical device. It was a statement. It was made of polished ebony with a solid silver handle in the shape of a lion's head. I didn't lean on it. I carried it like a weapon. Behind me, the winter wind howled through the open doors, but I didn't feel the cold. Flanking me on my left was Sarah, my chief legal counsel, a woman who could dismantle a corporation with a single memo. She carried a briefcase that contained the death warrant for the Preston family's reputation. On my right, and fanning out behind me, were 10 men. They were not the venue's standard rent-a-cops. These were private contractors, former military, men I had worked with on high-risk sites in Detroit and overseas. They wore matching black suits, earpieces, and expressions of absolute, terrifying neutrality. We moved as a phalanx, a solid wall of force cutting through the stagnant, perfumed air of the ballroom. I looked straight ahead. I saw the guests parting like the Red Sea. I saw the confusion on their faces turn to shock. They whispered behind their hands. They pointed. They knew who I was, or at least, they thought they did. They saw the resemblance, but they couldn't reconcile the image of the billionaire tycoon Madison had described, the man supposedly in Dubai, with the man walking towards them with an army at his back. Then I saw Madison. She was standing near the cake, her hand frozen halfway to her mouth. Her face had drained of all color. The glass of champagne she was holding tilted dangerously, spilling expensive vintage onto the floor, but she didn't notice. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. In that moment, she wasn't the arrogant bride who had sent me a bill. She was a little girl who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. She knew. Somewhere deep in her gut, she knew that the game was over. She looked at my suit. She looked at the cane. She looked at the men behind me. The lie about Dubai. The lie about my unavailability. The lie about my social standing. It was all crumbling in real time. But the Prestons, in their infinite arrogance, didn't see the danger. They only saw an interruption. Richard Preston pushed his way through the crowd, his face red with indignation. He adjusted his bow tie aggressively and marched towards me, though he stopped a safe 10 feet away when one of my bodyguards shifted slightly. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Richard barked, his voice cracking slightly. "You can't just barge in here. This is a private event. Where is security? Someone close those damn doors." He didn't recognize me. He had never bothered to meet me. To him, I was just an abstract concept, a bank account attached to a blue-collar ghost. I didn't answer him. I didn't even slow down. I kept walking, my eyes locked on the stage where Liam was standing. Liam, however, recognized me. He had seen photos. He had mocked those photos. He squinted through the blinding light of the open doors, and then his recognition turned into a sneer of pure, unadulterated malice. He grabbed the microphone from the stand, the feedback screeching through the speakers. "Oh, this is rich," Liam shouted, his voice booming over the sound system. "Look, everyone, it is the plumber. It is Madison's embarrassing father." A gasp went through the room. 500 heads turned from him to me. Liam laughed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Did you get lost on the way to the service entrance, old man? Did you come to fix the toilet? Look at him. He is trying to play dress-up." He turned to his groomsmen, seeking their validation. "Get him out of here!" Liam yelled, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. "Security! Where's the damn security? Throw this crippled old man out into the snow where he belongs. He's ruining the aesthetic. He is trespassing on a Preston family event." I stopped. I was 5 yards from the stage. I planted my cane on the floor with a loud thud. I looked up at Liam. He was sweating. He was terrified, but he was trying to cover it with bravado. He thought he was the king of the castle. He thought his name on the invitation gave him power. "Security!" Liam screamed again, his voice reaching a hysterical pitch. I said, "Remove him. Now. I pay your salaries. Get him out of my sight." From the shadows of the room, the venue's official security team emerged. There were 6 of them, led by Marcus, the head of security I had met yesterday. They were big men, imposing in their uniforms. They moved quickly, their boots thudding against the floor. The guests gasped again. Some people stepped back, expecting violence. They expected to see the old man dragged away. Madison put her hands over her mouth, a silent scream building in her throat. Richard Preston crossed his arms, a smug smile returning to his face. "Yeah, toss him out," Richard yelled, "and call the police. I want him arrested for harassment." Marcus and his team marched past the guests. They marched past Richard Preston without looking at him. They marched straight towards me. Liam grinned. "Finally." "Get his legs," he shouted. But Marcus didn't grab me. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. He snapped his heels together. And then, with the precision of a drill sergeant, he turned around. He turned his back to me. He faced Liam. The other 5 guards did the same. They formed a semicircle around me and my team, facing outward. They crossed their arms over their chests, their expressions stony. They weren't there to remove me. They were there to protect me. The room went deadly silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Liam's grin faltered. He lowered the microphone slowly. What are you doing?" he stammered. "I gave you an order. I am the groom. Turn around. Grab him." Marcus didn't flinch. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying in the silent room without need for a microphone. "We don't take orders from guests, sir. We take orders from the owner." Liam blinked. "Guests? Who are you calling a guest? I am the client. I rented this place." I stepped forward. The wall of security parted to let me pass. I walked up the stairs to the stage. My leg didn't drag. I willed it to be strong. I walked with the rhythm of an executioner climbing the scaffold. I reached the spot where Liam was standing. He shrank back, stumbling over a monitor speaker. He looked small. He looked like a boy who had been caught wearing his father's shoes. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He didn't resist. He was too paralyzed by confusion. I turned to face the crowd. The blinding stage lights hit my face, but I didn't squint. I looked out at the sea of white roses and expensive suits. I looked at the investors Richard Preston was trying to scam. I looked at the daughter who had sold me out for a chance to be part of this circus. I tapped the microphone twice. Thump, thump. The sound echoed like a heartbeat through the massive hall. I waited until the silence was absolute. I waited until I could hear the ice melting in the sculptures. "I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding regarding the security protocols," I said, my voice calm, deep, and resonating with the authority of a man who has poured the foundation of the building he is standing in. I looked at Liam, who was trembling beside me. "You called for security to remove the trespasser," I said to him, my voice amplified to every corner of the room. "You asked them to remove the person who has no legal right to be here. You asked them to protect the property." I turned back to the crowd. "And they have done exactly that." I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out the deed. I unfolded it slowly. The paper crinkled in the microphone. I held it up for everyone to see. The stamp of the city recorder was clearly visible in the spotlight. "I am afraid the person who has to get out is you, Liam," I said, my voice turning to steel. "And you, Madison. And you, Richard. Because you are seemingly under the impression that you are hosting a party. But the truth is, as of yesterday afternoon, you are trespassing on my private property." The gasp that went through the room this time wasn't of shock. It was of awe. The payoff had arrived, and I was just getting started. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, the kind of silence that usually happens right before a building collapses. I held the deed in the air for another moment, letting the official seal catch the light, ensuring that every pair of eyes in the room had registered the reality of the situation. Then, I slowly lowered my hand and looked directly at Richard Preston. He was standing near the stage, his face a mottled mix of purple rage and pale terror. He looked like a man who had just realized his parachute was actually a backpack full of rocks. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My voice was calm, almost conversational, which I knew made it infinitely more terrifying than if I had screamed. "According to the addendum signed yesterday by the previous owner, Mr. Sterling, and myself, any outstanding rental fees for scheduled events were due immediately upon transfer of ownership." I paused, letting the words sink in. The deadline for that payment was 12 noon today. It is now 12:05. I turned to look at Liam, who was still trembling on the stage next to me. "I checked the accounts before I walked through those doors, Liam. The balance is 0. You haven't paid. And because you haven't paid, you are in breach of contract. Richard Preston finally found his voice. He lunged forward, pushing a waiter aside. "This is insanity!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is a trick! You can't just buy a venue in the middle of a wedding. I have a contract. I have rights. I will sue you for everything you are worth." I looked down at him from the edge of the stage. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt pity. He was a small man trying to cast a big shadow. "You have no rights, Richard," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You have debts. Millions of dollars of them. You have mortgaged your home. You have liquidated your assets. And you have spent the last 6 months playing a shell game with your creditors. And today, you tried to use my daughter's wedding as the final hustle." The room erupted. The word debts hung in the air like smoke. I saw the group of Japanese investors, the men Richard had been courting all afternoon, suddenly stiffen. They began to speak rapidly among themselves in Japanese. One of them, a stern-faced man in a blue suit, stepped forward and pointed at Richard. "Is this true?" the investor asked, his English heavily accented but crystal clear. "Is it true you are insolvent? We were told your liquidity was secure. We were told this event was proof of your capital." Richard turned to them, panic wild in his eyes. No, of course not. Mr. Tanaka, please. This man is a lunatic. He is a disgruntled relative. He is lying to sabotage the deal." I didn't let him finish. I signaled to Leo, who was standing in the wings with a tablet connected to the room's main projector. "Leo, show them," I commanded. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a loop of romantic photos of Madison and Liam, suddenly flickered. The image changed. It wasn't a photo. It was a bank statement. It was the Preston family's primary operating account, dated yesterday. The balance was negative $400,000. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a sound of pure shock. The facade was gone. The curtain had been ripped down, and the wizard was just a broke con artist. I spoke again, my voice cutting through the rising murmur. "You aren't here to celebrate a marriage," I said to the 500 guests. "You are here as props. You are here to populate a stage set so that Richard Preston could secure a seed round of funding to keep himself out of jail. You are extras in a fraud." The chaos started then. It wasn't a riot, but it was the messy, ugly disintegration of civilized society. The investors surrounded Richard, shouting demands for explanations. Mr. Tanaka was yelling about due diligence. A woman at table 4 stood up and threw her wine glass at the wall, screaming that she had loaned Cynthia Preston $50,000 last week. The veneer of politeness evaporated instantly. I watched it all from the stage. I watched the house of cards tumble. I looked at my watch. "You have 15 minutes, I announced, my voice booming over the chaos. The room froze again, turning back to me. "In 15 minutes, I continued, the police will arrive. I have already called them to report a trespassing in progress and a potential securities fraud. If you are a guest, I suggest you leave now to avoid being questioned. If you are a Preston, I suggest you start packing. You have 15 minutes to remove your personal effects, your decorations, and yourselves from my property. Anything left after that time will be considered abandoned and will be thrown in the dumpster." I motioned to my security team. Marcus and his men stepped forward, forming a line at the base of the stage, arms crossed, waiting for the countdown. The guests didn't need to be told twice. It was a stampede. People grabbed their coats and purses. No one looked at the bride. No one looked at the groom. They just wanted to distance themselves from the stench of failure. The so-called elite of Chicago, the people Madison wanted so desperately to impress, were scrambling over each other to get out the door. And then there was Madison. She was standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. The crowd flowed around her like a river around a rock. Her face was streaked with tears, her mascara running down her cheeks in black lines. She looked at Liam, but he was busy arguing with his father, blaming him for the disaster. He didn't even look at her. She looked at me. For the first time in years, she really looked at me. She didn't see a checkbook. She didn't see an embarrassment. She saw the only person in the room who had any real power. She started to run. She pushed through the fleeing guests, tripping over the hem of her dress, stumbling in her high heels. She ran to the edge of the stage where I was standing. Even now, on her knees, she was asking me to write a check. She wasn't sorry for hurting me. She was sorry the money tap had turned off. I reached down. For a second, her face lit up with hope. She thought I was going to pull her up and hug her. Instead, I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my leg. I stepped back. "I am not your ATM, Madison," I said coldly. "And I am not your father right now. I am the landlord, and you are trespassing." I turned my back on her. "You have 14 minutes left," I said over my shoulder. "I suggest you go find your husband. He looks like he is about to vomit on my stage." I walked away, heading towards the back of the stage where my team was waiting. Behind me, I heard her wail, a sound of pure despair. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I had cut the dead branch. Now, I just had to wait for the wind to blow it away. The heavy oak doors of the grand manor slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a final gavel strike, sealing the warmth and the light inside, and leaving the Preston family standing on the concrete steps of the portico. The Chicago winter had been waiting for them. The sky, which had been a deceptively bright blue earlier that morning, had turned a bruised shade of gray, and the snow was beginning to fall in earnest. It wasn't the romantic dusting of snow that Madison had envisioned for her wedding photos. These were hard, stinging pellets of ice driven by a biting wind coming off the lake. The kind of cold that finds the gaps in your clothes and settles into your bones within seconds. I stood on the other side of the glass, inside the grand foyer, watching them. I wasn't hiding. I stood right there in the center of the warm, golden light, my hands clasped behind my back, witnessing the reality check I had orchestrated. Outside, the scene was pathetic. Madison was shivering violently. Her custom-made dress, a strapless silk masterpiece that cost more than a mid-sized car, offered zero protection against the elements. The wind whipped her veil around her face, tangling it in her hair, turning the symbol of her purity into a nuisance. She wrapped her bare arms around herself, her skin already turning a mottled, unhealthy shade of blue. Beside her, Richard and Cynthia Preston huddled together, not out of affection, but out of a desperate need to conserve heat. Richard's tuxedo was thin, and Cynthia had left her fur coat in the cloakroom, which was now locked. They looked like refugees in formal wear, stripped of their armor. They were looking around wildly for their cars. They expected the valet service to be waiting, engines running, heaters blasting. But the driveway was empty. The fleet of Bentleys and Mercedes they had leased for the day was gone. The moment I announced the fraud and the police were called, the rental company, which I had tipped off through an intermediary an hour prior, had triggered the GPS kill switches and sent their recovery teams. The cars had been towed away while the Prestons were busy being humiliated inside. Even the investors and the other guests had fled, taking every available Uber and taxi in a 5-mile radius. The Prestons were stranded. They were alone. And the silence of the empty driveway was broken only by the howling wind and the sound of their own destruction. I saw Madison reach out to Liam. She moved towards him, stumbling slightly in her heels on the slick pavement. She looked like a child seeking comfort from a parent after a nightmare. She reached for his hand, probably expecting him to hold her, to tell her they would figure it out, to tell her that at least they had each other. But Liam didn't take her hand. He swatted it away as if she were a contagion. "Get off me!" Liam screamed, his voice muffled by the glass, but his rage clearly visible. He paced back and forth on the snowy concrete, kicking at a stone urn. "This is your fault! This is all your fault!" Madison recoiled, shock replacing the cold on her face. "My fault?" she mouthed, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Liam, what are you talking about?" "My dad. He went crazy. We are victims here." "Victims," Liam laughed, a sound that twisted his face into something ugly and unrecognizable. "You stupid, naive little girl. We aren't victims. We are bankrupt. Do you understand English? We are finished." He stepped closer to her, looming over her shivering form. "We needed that money, Madison," he spat, the spittle flying from his mouth. "We needed your father's stupid blue-collar cash to pay off the bridge loans. We needed the investors in that room to sign the checks today. That was the whole point." Madison shook her head, confusion clouding her eyes. But we love each other. The wedding." "Does." Liam looked at her with pure disgust. "Love?" he sneered. "Do you really think I would marry a construction worker's daughter for love? Look at you. You are desperate. You are tacky. You try so hard to be one of us, but you never will be. We married you for the liquidity, Madison. You were an asset. And now, thanks to your lunatic father, you are a liability. You are worthless." The word hung in the frozen air between them. Worthless. Madison stood there, the snow gathering on her bare shoulders, her mouth slightly open. The man she had defied her father for, the man she had insulted her heritage for, was telling her the truth for the first time. She wasn't a princess to him. She was a paycheck that had bounced. Liam wasn't done. The stress, the humiliation, and the fear of the impending police investigation made him snap. He raised his hand. I tensed on the other side of the glass. I signaled to Marcus, who was standing by the door, ready to intervene. But before Marcus could move, Liam struck. He didn't punch her, but he slapped her. It was a sharp, vicious backhand that caught her on the cheek. The force of it knocked her head to the side and sent her stumbling back against the cold stone pillar of the entrance. "You useless waste of time!" Liam screamed, his voice cracking. "You should have just got the check. You should have controlled him. Now we are going to jail because of you." Madison didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just slid down the pillar, her legs giving out, until she was sitting in a heap of white silk on the dirty, snow-covered ground. She held her hand to her cheek, her eyes wide, staring at the man she had promised to love and cherish just an hour ago. The illusion was completely shattered. The golden boy was a monster. The fairy tale was a horror story. Richard and Cynthia didn't even intervene. They were too busy arguing with each other on the other side of the steps, blaming one another for the failed scheme. They didn't care that their son had just assaulted his wife. They didn't care that she was freezing. They only cared that the money was gone. Madison turned her head away from Liam. She looked towards the building. She looked towards the warmth. She looked at me. Through the thick plate glass of the double doors, our eyes met. I stood there in my suit, warm and dry, but I wasn't alone. Behind me, in the grand foyer, the scene was a stark contrast to the misery outside. I had ordered the staff to bring the food out. I had ordered the wine to be uncorked. Madison watched as I turned slightly and gestured to a young waitress, the same girl Richard Preston had snapped his fingers at earlier. I poured her a glass of the vintage Dom Perignon. I handed it to her with a smile and a nod of respect. She looked shocked, then grateful, taking the glass with a shy smile. Next to her, Marcus and the security team were eating the lobster tails and the prime rib sliders that were meant for the elite. The florists were sitting on the velvet benches, laughing, holding plates of caviar. The cleaning staff were sampling the truffle risotto. I was hosting a party, but it wasn't for the people who thought they ruled the world. It was for the people who built it. It was for the people who cleaned it. It was for the people who served. I saw Madison watching this. She saw her father, the man she was ashamed of, treating the help like royalty. She saw me laughing with a busboy, clapping him on the shoulder. She saw the warmth. She saw the respect. She saw the genuine joy that comes from honest labor and honest gratitude. And she saw what she had thrown away. She had traded a father who would have moved mountains for a husband who hit her when the check didn't clear. She had traded a home built on love and sacrifice for a house of cards built on fraud and contempt. She looked at me, and I could see the word forming on her lips. Dad. I looked at her. I didn't look away. I let her see me. I let her see that I was okay. I let her see that I didn't need her approval to be a king in my own castle. But I didn't open the door. I turned my back to the window. I turned back to my guests, to the waitress and the security guards. I raised my glass to them, and they cheered. Behind me, outside in the cold, the weight of her choices finally crushed her. Madison didn't try to stand up. She didn't try to beg Liam again. She just slumped forward, her face burying into the freezing wet snow, her beautiful, expensive dress spreading out around her like a white shroud. She lay there, shivering, broken, and alone, while the snow continued to fall, covering her in a blanket of white, erasing her from the picture, just as she had tried to erase me. 7 days. That is how long it takes for a life to completely unravel. 7 days of silence. 7 days of snow covering the tracks of the disaster at the Grand Manor. I spent those 7 days inside my house, the house I built with my own hands, sitting in my study, listening to the quiet. It wasn't a lonely silence anymore. It was a peaceful one. The kind of silence that comes after you finally finish a job that has been dragging on for far too long. I had my phone turned off. I had the curtains drawn. I was done with the drama. I was done with the noise. But I knew she would come. I knew Madison wouldn't be able to stay away, not because she missed me, but because she had nowhere else to go. The Prestons were ruined. The scandal had hit the papers the morning after the wedding. Fraud. Bankruptcy. The police investigation was ongoing. Their assets were frozen, their reputation incinerated. Madison had bet on the wrong horse, and now that the horse had collapsed, she was looking for a new ride. It was Tuesday afternoon when the security alert chimed on my desk monitor. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I looked anyway. There she was, standing at the main gate. She didn't arrive in a Bentley this time. She didn't arrive in a limousine. A yellow taxi was just pulling away, leaving streaks of slush on the asphalt. Madison stood alone in front of the 10-foot iron gates. She looked small. She looked broken. The arrogance was gone. The designer clothes were gone. She was wearing a simple wool coat that I recognized from her college days, one that she had probably dug out of a storage box. Her hair, usually perfectly blown out, was pulled back in a messy bun. She wore no makeup. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy from a week of crying. She looked like the little girl who used to scrape her knees playing in the driveway, looking for her daddy to kiss it better. My hand hovered over the button that would open the gate. It would be so easy. It would be so easy to let her in, to let her cry on my shoulder, to write another check, to fix another mess. That is what fathers do, isn't it? We fix things. We build bridges. We pour concrete over the cracks so the foundation looks solid again. But then I looked at the scar on my hand. I remembered the invoice she sent me. I remembered the way she looked at me when she thought I was nothing but a wallet. I didn't press the button. Instead, I pressed the intercom. I watched her jump as the speaker crackled to life. She moved closer to the camera, pressing her face against the cold iron bars. "Daddy," she cried, her voice distorted by the speaker but still thick with desperation. "Daddy, please let me in. It is freezing out here, please. I have nowhere else to go." I sat in my warm leather chair and said nothing. "Daddy, I left him," she sobbed, the words tumbling out of her. "I left Liam. You were right. You were right about everything. He is a monster. He blamed me. He hit me. I filed for divorce this morning. I am done with them, I promise. I just want to come home. I just want my dad." She waited. She expected the gate to swing open. She expected the forgiveness that had always been automatic. I pressed the button for the internal line. "Leo," I said calmly, "go to the gate. Take the envelope." Leo didn't ask questions. He knew this moment was coming. I watched on the monitor as Leo walked out the front door, buttoning his coat against the wind. He walked down the long driveway, his footsteps steady and rhythmic. Madison saw him coming, and her face lit up. She wiped her tears. She thought Leo was coming to open the lock. She thought the ordeal was over. Leo reached the gate, but he didn't reach for the keypad. He stood on the inside, separated from her by the black iron bars. "Leo, oh thank God," Madison said, reaching through the bars. "Open it up. My dad. He is listening, right? Tell him I am sorry. Tell him I am back." Leo looked at her. There was no malice in his eyes, but there was no pity either. He was a professional. "Mr. Caldwell is busy, Madison," Leo said. "He asked me to give you this." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it through the gap in the bars. Madison took it, confused. Her hands were shaking. "What is this?" she asked. Is it money? Is it a key?" "Open it," Leo said gently. She tore open the flap. She pulled out the stack of papers. The top document was a spreadsheet, meticulously detailed, printed on heavy bond paper. It was titled, "Invoice for Services Rendered, Parenting and Development." Madison stared at it. Her eyes scanned the rows. Private school tuition, $400,000. University education, $350,000. First car, $60,000. Luxury apartment rent, $120,000. Bailouts and legal fees, $80,000. Wedding venue purchase, $15 million. She flipped the page. The total at the bottom was highlighted in red. $2,410,000. What is this? She stammered, looking up at Leo. Is this a joke? He wants me to pay him back? I don't have this kind of money. He knows I don't have this money. Leo didn't answer. He pointed to the second item in the envelope. Madison reached in again. Her fingers brushed against something stiff. She pulled it out. It was an airline ticket. Economy class. One way. Destination: Omaha, Nebraska. Departure: tonight at 9 p.m. Nebraska, she whispered, her voice trembling. Why Nebraska? I don't know anyone in Nebraska. Leo finally spoke, reciting the message I had given him word for word. There is a small motel in Omaha that is hiring housekeeping staff. Mr. Caldwell has arranged a job interview for you tomorrow morning. The first month's rent at a boarding house has been paid. After that, you are on your own. Madison looked at the ticket, then at the invoice, then at the house that was so close and yet so far away. The realization started to dawn on her. This wasn't a punishment. This was an eviction. No! She screamed, dropping the papers in the snow. No! I am not going to Nebraska! I am not being a maid! I am his daughter! He can't do this to me! Daddy! She grabbed the bars and shook them, screaming at the camera. Daddy! Stop this! It isn't funny! I said I was sorry! I leaned forward and pressed the talk button on the intercom one last time. My voice boomed from the speaker at the gate, cutting through her hysteria. I heard you, Madison. She stopped screaming. She looked up at the camera, tears streaming down her face. Daddy, please, just open the gate. I taught you how to lay a foundation, Madison, I said, my voice heavy with a sadness I could no longer hide. I taught you that you have to work for what you build. I gave you the tools. I gave you the materials. But you chose to pick up a sledgehammer. You chose to destroy everything I built for you because you thought you were too good for the work. I paused. I watched her shivering in the cold. You broke it, Madison. You broke the trust. You broke the bond. And you can't fix a foundation with an apology. You have to rebuild it, brick by brick, from the bottom up. Daddy, I can't, she whispered. I don't know how. Then you better learn, I said, because that invoice in your hand is your debt to me. Not the money, the effort, the character. You owe me a daughter who understands the value of $1 and the value of loyalty. Until you can pay that debt, until you can stand on your own 2 feet without using my name or my money, you are a stranger to this house. But where will I go? She cried. You have a ticket, I said. And you have a job interview. That is more than I had when I started. I released the button. Daddy, she screamed. Daddy! I turned off the monitor. The screen went black. I sat there in the silence. I knew Leo would wait until she left. I knew she would stand there for another 10 minutes, crying, begging, bargaining. But eventually, the cold would get to her. Eventually, she would look at that ticket and realize it was the only lifeline she had left. She had asked for a life of luxury. She had asked for status. Instead, I gave her the only thing she actually needed. I gave her a chance to become a human being. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. I looked at the empty space on the mantel where her picture used to be. It hurt. God, it hurt. But as I looked at the fire, I remembered the bonsai tree. I remembered the rot. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had done the only thing a father could do to save his child from herself. I sat back down and picked up a new file. It was the blueprint for the community center I was building in the old venue. Life goes on. The work goes on. And for the first time in a long time, the builder was finally free. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the mahogany floor of the study. It was the only sound in the room, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise that had filled my life for the past few months. I sat in my old leather armchair, feeling the warmth of the flames against my shins. But my attention was fixed on the stack of documents resting on the small table before me. Opposite me sat Leo. He was quiet, respectful, and patient, just as he had been through this entire ordeal. He was not my blood. He did not carry the Caldwell name by birth, yet as I looked at him, I saw more of myself in his eyes than I had ever seen in my own daughter. The papers were ready. They were legal, binding, and irrevocable. The grand manor, the estate that Madison had schemed so viciously to acquire, the property she believed was her birthright simply because she shared my DNA, was about to be transformed. It would not be a boutique hotel for the elite. It would not be a summer home for her vanity. It would become the Caldwell Vocational Center, a place where young men and women from the poorest neighborhoods could learn a trade, could build a life with their own hands, just as I had done so many years ago. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, not with the weight of hesitation, but with the gravity of the moment. I looked at Leo and nodded. He offered a small, sad smile, a smile that understood the pain of what I was doing, but also recognized the absolute necessity of it. I signed the first page, then the second. With every stroke of the pen, I felt a layer of burden lifting from my shoulders. For years, I had been carrying the weight of Madison's expectations, her entitlement, her greed. I had carried it because I thought that was what a father was supposed to do. I thought that if I just gave enough, if I just forgave enough, eventually she would see me. She would see the love behind the money. But I was wrong. You cannot fill a cup that has no bottom. You cannot save someone who does not want to be saved, only financed. I turned the page to the final signature line. This was the deed transfer. Once I signed this, there was no going back. The grand manor would belong to the foundation, and Leo would be its director. He would ensure that the values of hard work and integrity were taught within those walls. I paused for a moment and reached into my pocket, pulling out a small, worn photograph. It was Madison when she was 5 years old. She was sitting on a swing, her hair messy, her smile missing a front tooth, her eyes full of innocent joy. I ran my thumb over the image. I had kept this photo close to my heart for decades, using it as a shield against the reality of the woman she had become. I used to look at this picture and tell myself that the little girl was still in there somewhere, buried under the layers of selfishness and cruelty. But tonight, sitting by this fire, I finally accepted the truth. That little girl was gone. She had been consumed by the monster of entitlement that I had perhaps helped to feed. I looked at the photo one last time, not with anger, but with a profound mourning. It was the funeral of a hope I had kept alive for too long. I placed the photo gently on the table next to the documents. It was time to let go. I realized then that I was not just signing away a building. I was performing a surgery on my own soul. I was cutting out the tumor that had been poisoning my life. It was a painful procedure, a severance of the deepest bond a human being can have. But it was necessary to save the rest of me. It was necessary to ensure that my legacy would be one of creation and not destruction. I signed the final line. The ink was dark and permanent. It was done. I capped the pen and placed it down. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed slightly in the quiet room. I looked up at Leo. "It is finished," I said, my voice raspy but steady. He reached out and took the folder. "You did the right thing, Henry," he said softly. "I know," I replied. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment. I thought about Madison. When she found out about this, when she realized that the well had finally run dry, that the house was gone, that her future was now entirely in her own hands, she would scream. She would cry. She would curse my name to anyone who would listen. She would play the victim, just as she always had. But for the first time in her life, she would have to face a consequence that Daddy could not fix. And perhaps in that cold, hard reality, she might finally find the opportunity to grow. Or perhaps she wouldn't. That was no longer my burden to carry. I had given her life. I had given her education. I had given her chances. Now I was giving her the only thing left that had any real value. I was giving her the truth. The truth that you eat what you kill, that you keep what you earn, and that respect is not an inheritance. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. It felt different now, lighter. The ghosts of the arguments, the echoes of the manipulation, they were fading. I looked at Leo and saw the future. A future where my name would be associated with young electricians and carpenters and plumbers building their own dignity. That was a legacy worth dying for. That was a legacy worth living for. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of wood smoke and old paper. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt since my wife passed away. I had lost a daughter, yes, but I had regained myself. I had reclaimed my dignity. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting slightly, but my spirit feeling younger than it had in years. I walked over to the window and looked out at the grounds of the estate. In a few months, this place would be bustling with life, with the noise of saws and hammers, with the energy of ambition. I smiled. It was a good ending. No, it was a good beginning. Blood is not a shield that protects you from the consequences of ingratitude. We often convince ourselves that we must endure abuse simply because it comes from our kin, that we must sacrifice our dignity on the altar of family. But sometimes the most loving thing a father can do is to open his hand and let go. Sometimes you have to let your children fall so they can learn how to stand. Buoying a toxic child does not save them. It only drowns you both. I chose to swim. I chose to breathe. 6 months have passed since that winter day, and the snow has long since melted, revealing the hard ground beneath. The grand manor is gone. The gold leaf was stripped from the walls, and the crystal chandeliers were sold at auction to pay for industrial lathes and welding equipment. The space where my daughter once stood, crying in a wedding dress she could not afford, is now filled with the sound of circular saws and the smell of fresh sawdust. I walk through the main hall every morning. It no longer smells of expensive perfume and desperation. It smells of honest sweat and opportunity. Yesterday, I watched a young man named Marcus welding a joint with a precision that reminded me of myself at his age. He is 19 years old, and before he came here, he was sleeping in his car. Now he has a trade. He has a future. He looked up at me and shook my hand. His grip was firm and his palm was rough. It was the handshake of a man who builds things, not a man who borrows them. That handshake meant more to me than all the socialite galas I was ever dragged to. I realized then that I had not lost a family. I had simply found a new one. These students are my legacy. They are the steel and concrete that will outlast me. As for the Prestons, they faded into the obscurity they feared most. The fraud investigation was thorough and merciless. It stripped them of their remaining assets and exposed every lie they had told to their investors. I heard through the grapevine that Richard is working as a low-level consultant for a firm that barely exists, and Liam is living in a basement apartment, blaming the world for his misfortune. They are still victims in their own minds. They never learned. They never will. They are ghosts haunting a life that no longer exists. But Madison is different. I received a letter last week, postmarked from Omaha, Nebraska. It was written on cheap notebook paper, not the heavy cream stationery she used to favor. The handwriting was hurried and practical. There was no request for money. There were no complaints about the cold or the lack of luxury. She wrote to tell me that she is working double shifts at a diner near the motel where she stays. She wrote that her feet hurt at the end of the day. She wrote that she finally understands why I always came home tired and why I fell asleep in my chair after dinner. She told me that she bought her own winter coat with her own tips. It is not a designer coat. It is probably ugly and bulky, but she paid for it herself. That coat means more to me than the $5 million trust fund ever did. She is struggling and she is lonely, but she is becoming real. She is shedding the layers of entitlement like a snake shedding old skin. I did not write back yet. I will let her sit with that pride for a while. I will let her understand that the feeling of buying your own coat is better than the feeling of being given a castle. I sit here now in my study, looking at the bonsai tree. It has new growth. The branch I cut away left a scar, but the tree is healthier for it. It is stronger. I am stronger. I have stopped apologizing for my success. I have stopped apologizing for my standards. I have reclaimed my life from the people who viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be mined. The silence in my house is no longer heavy. It is peaceful. It is the silence of a job well done. I look at Leo, who is organizing the scholarship fund for the next semester. He smiles at me. We don't need to say anything. We know that we did the right thing. We know that saving someone often looks like hurting them at first. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes. I can hear the hum of the city outside the city I helped build. I am part of it again. I am not a spectator in my own life. Ultimately, we must realize that true generosity is not about giving people what they want. It is about giving them what they need, even if they hate you for it. It is about having the strength to be the villain in their story, so they can eventually become the hero in their own. My name is Henry Caldwell, and I am no longer just a builder of buildings. I am a builder of character. If you believe that respect must be earned, and that hard work is the only true currency in this life, then please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about standing your ground, and tell me in the comments if you would have opened that gate, or if you would have kept it closed. I read every single one. Stay strong.